On this vote, the yeas are 216, the nays are 210. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The office of Speaker of the House of the United States House of Representatives is hereby declared vacant.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in the history of the United States House of Representatives, a sitting Speaker of the House was removed from their office by majority vote of members of the body. On October 3rd, 2023, the 9-month reign of Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, as Speaker of the United States House was brought to an end. This has got to be one of the most historic votes that I have ever personally witnessed in my life. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happened, how it all came about, thoughts on the whole thing, and where it goes from here. Hang on, folks. We're going to get into all this in just 1 second. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. After last weekend's debate of and passage of the continuing resolution that helped fund the government and avoid a government shutdown, U.S. Representative Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, had publicly threatened to bring a motion to vacate the chair to a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. Many people, including myself, thought Gaetz would not be able to pull off the effort, that there were too many loyalists to Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, to prevent him from losing his speakership. But as the Chinese are fond of saying, may you live in interesting times. And today, on Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023, the people of the United States witnessed one of the most historic votes ever taken in the history of the U.S. Congress, where for the first time ever, a Speaker of the House was removed from their position by a majority vote of the members of the body. So we're going to take a look at all this, see who the players were involved. I'll give you my thoughts on it, and then we'll take a look at where it goes from here. We'll start with NBC News. House oust Kevin McCarthy as Speaker in historic vote. U.S. Representative Matt Gaetz forced the vote after McCarthy helped pass a bill to keep the government funded. Gaetz and 7 other Republicans, along with all Democrats, voted to remove McCarthy. Article written by Sut Wong, Ali Vitali, Kyle Stewart, and Safil Kapoor. The House of Representatives on Tuesday took the unprecedented step of ousting a speaker from office less than 9 months after Kevin McCarthy won the powerful gavel in a dramatic 15-round floor fight. The vote was 216 to 210 to topple the California Republican, who continued to insist to the bitter end that he would never give up. After the vote, the office of the Speaker of the House, the second rung on the ladder of succession to the U.S. presidency, was declared vacant. All 208 Democrats teamed up with just 8 GOP rebels to vacate the Speaker's chair, the first time in history that lawmakers have formally voted to remove a sitting Speaker in the middle of a term. An overwhelming number of Republicans, 210, voted to keep McCarthy in power, but it was not enough to stop the effort led by Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, who for weeks had accused McCarthy of breaking promises to conservatives to cut spending. Quote, "We heard Speaker McCarthy say that he wanted us to, quote, bring it on. So I guess we did," Gaetz told reporters after the successful vote. The historic vote threw the GOP-controlled House into chaos, Ladies and gentlemen, keep that word in mind because you're going to hear that a lot in the next few days. As lawmakers struggle to figure out what to do next, the session ended with another surprise. It was announced that Financial Services Chair Patrick McHenry, Republican, North Carolina, a top McCarthy ally, is now the Speaker pro tem, put on a secret list McCarthy provided to the clerk in January in the event of a vacancy. After assuming the Speaker's chair, where he'll serve as an interim capacity, McCarthy slammed the gavel down in anger. Okay, let's talk about some of this. As I said, this is probably one of the most historic votes I have ever watched in my entire life. Greater than the votes on 9/11, greater than the votes on the war, the first war in Iraq, the second war in Iraq, and so on. There's a lot to go through in this, and I will do my best to compact it down to a manageable level because this could just go on for a conversation. So, all Democrats voted for the motion to vacate the chair, but who are these 8 Republicans, these so-called rebels of the House? Well, let's start from there. Some of the names and faces you'll recognize almost immediately: Matt Gaetz of Florida, Nancy Mace of South Carolina, and she was a surprise. I'll explain why in just a moment. Andy Biggs of Arizona, Matt Rosendale of Montana, going on the bottom row from left to right. Eli Crane of Arizona, Ken Buck of Colorado, Tim Burchett of Tennessee, and Bob Good of Virginia. Now, I said that Nancy Mace was a bit of a surprise, and I'll tell you why. Of those 8 individuals, there is one who does not like the others, and that's Nancy. Now, it's not to say that Nancy's not a good Republican and mostly conservative, but as far as being considered a Freedom Caucus, America First, MAGA kind of Republican, nah, she doesn't fall into that category. So why did she do it? Well, according to reports, she was not happy with McCarthy because of promises that he made to her and fulfillments that never came through, and finally she got a belly full of it. So when the move came about to try to oust McCarthy out of the speakership, she went along with it. Now, what exactly is, well, before I get to that, the article mentioned that McHenry slammed the gavel down in anger, and I'm sorry, this definitely deserves your viewing pleasure or displeasure, depending on which side of this argument you're on. Take a look, folks, at the reaction of McHenry toward the ending of the proceeding, and you'll get an idea of just how he felt about the whole thing, especially given that he's a top McCarthy ally. Folks, take a look at this.
In the opinion of the chair, prior to proceeding to the election of a speaker, it would be prudent to first recess for the relative caucus and conferences to meet and discuss the path forward. Accordingly, pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess subject to the call of the chair.
Well, I'll say this much. If he wasn't trying to kill a fly, he was definitely getting some frustrations out. That was not a happy man, as was most of the people in the 210 votes that tried to keep McCarthy in power. Now, as far as how all this came about, what Gaetz employed is something known as a motion to vacate the chair. Now, if you've not heard of this motion, that's not surprising. It's only been invoked 3 times in the entire history of the U.S. House of Representatives. So let's take a look at exactly what it is. This is from Wikipedia. A motion to vacate is a formal proposal either to vacate or reverse the decision in a matter which had been previously ruled upon or decided, or to replace the holder of a presiding position, which is exactly what was done here. Under House Rule Number 9, a resolution to declare the office of Speaker of the United States House of Representatives vacant is considered privileged, meaning if it is introduced on the floor by a member, it must be put to a vote within 2 legislative days. Going a little bit further, and this is why this motion is so rarely invoked. There's only been 3 times in American history that the motion to vacate's ever even been brought. In 1910, Republican Speaker Joe Cannon, who had just faced a revolt by his caucus on a resolution concerning committee assignments, introduced a motion to vacate his own speakership. He was sure the motion would fail, showing that he still had the backing of the majority of the House. Cannon's plan succeeded, with the House rejecting the motion by a majority of 37 votes. In 2015, then Representative Mark Meadows, who is now former President Donald Trump's former chief of staff, filed a motion to vacate the speakership of John Boehner. Since the motion was not introduced on the floor, it was non-privileged and was referred to by the Rules Committee, instead of being subject to an immediate vote by the full House. Although the proposal was never voted upon, it still contributed to Boehner's decision to resign in September 2015. And then finally, the motion to vacate that was brought today. I'll be honest with you. I did not think Gaetz could pull this off. I thought, as I said earlier, that McCarthy had enough allies and enough swing to be able to hang on to the speakership. I was wrong. And as I've always told you, my audience, if I don't get one right, I'll come back and tell you. And this is one of those moments I was surprisingly wrong. But I am human after all. I may be the front porch conservative, but I am most certainly not perfect. So let's get into some thoughts about all this. Number one, a lot of anger is going to be directed at Matt Gaetz for what happened. And I will make the argument that he does not deserve everything that he's going to get. Now, here's what I'm referring to. I have no doubt in my mind at all that a lot of what went into this was anger on the part of Matt Gaetz toward McCarthy. Maybe it was personal, maybe it was professional and political, maybe a little bit of all three. People are going to accuse him of throwing the House into chaos, which we'll get to that subject in just a moment. My personal feeling on the matter is Gaetz was doing nothing more than enforcing a boundary. Let's remember how it was that McCarthy came to be Speaker of the House. It took 15 ballots, and it took ringing concessions out of McCarthy from the Freedom Caucus, led by Matt Gaetz, that they wanted certain things done. They wanted a full and complete investigation into Joe Biden. They wanted spending cuts, and that was their biggest complaint, that we were spending too much money, along with a whole host of other things. McCarthy agreed to this, and some will say he even agreed to it in writing, as Matt Gaetz kept referring to in the weeks leading up to today's vote. So now the deed is done. Caesar has been killed, so to speak. But is Gaetz really at fault for this? Not from my perspective. All he was doing was enforcing the agreement that McCarthy made. Gaetz told him very early on. The Freedom Caucus told him very early on. You don't do these things, we'll bring a motion to vacate. And that is exactly what they did. So, Gaetz is going to get a lot of heat for this. Personally, I don't think he deserves nearly as much as he's going to get. Number two, some are going to call all of this chaos. I think it's anything but that. Now, here's what I'm getting at. The buzzword of the day after all this went down is chaos. The House has been thrown into chaos. If we do this, we'll be thrown into chaos. Oh my God, we can't do this. Okay, number one, even after the vote took place, there was a succession plan already implemented. Now, the reason that McHenry wound up being Speaker pro tem is this. In 2003, after the events of 9/11, the Speaker was required to give a list of names to the clerk of the House that if in the event, God forbid, something happened, that there would be a line of succession in the speakership such that the body would not be thrown into chaos. Okay, a motion to vacate was made, the motion was voted on, the speakership was vacated. That does not mean the House is without leadership. Now, being Speaker pro tem, McHenry is going to have very limited abilities in terms of what he can do. He can gavel the body in, he can gavel the body into recess, etc. But he will not be in line for succession to the presidency. If, God forbid, something happened to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris at the same time, it would fall to the Senate president pro tempore, which with the passing of Dianne Feinstein, I'd have to actually look up who that now is, but you get my point. The speakership is bypassed in this situation. So no, there's not chaos in the House of Representatives. There are now going to have to be some decisions about what happens going forward. And frankly, let's think about this for a second. If conservatives and libertarians and even, reasonably minded moderates truly want change in Washington, you're going to have to accept the fact you're going to have to shake things up. McCarthy, in the opinion of many in the House, was not getting it done as far as spending cuts, holding the line against Joe Biden, investigating what may be criminal actions on the part of the president. They were frustrated. Now, granted, 210 Republicans voted to keep McCarthy in the speakership. I'm not so sure they were really voting their conscience on that one. But enough individuals did that, along with the Democrats, who don't like McCarthy anyway and wanted any chance they could get to try to get their hands back on the levers of power, even if it means teaming up with 8 Republicans. In the end, they put McCarthy out. So no, there's not chaos involved here, but there is change, and it has the potential to be very, very good for America, depending upon where we go from here in terms of who becomes Speaker. Number 3, McCarthy sowed the seeds of his own political destruction long before the House passed that continuing resolution last weekend. As a matter of fact, he sowed those seeds back in 2022. Here's what I'm getting at. During the 2022 midterm election, it was widely recognized that there was a golden opportunity for Republicans to pick up a big majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. But it was an issue that McCarthy wasn't necessarily interested in picking up a big majority in the House as much as he was a majority that would make sure he was Speaker. Translation, he was going around behind the scenes in one form or another, undercutting the efforts of America First MAGA Republicans who were running in primaries against his hand-picked people that he wanted to make sure they got in. In the end, because of the fact that he was doing that and the fact that the Republicans really didn't lay out a very good vision of what they wanted to do for the country if they did come to the majority, along with several other factors, McCarthy wound up getting a majority in the U.S. House, but it was a very small majority, which means that the Freedom Caucus, although not making up a majority of the members of the U.S. House of Representatives, would have an oversized influence on what would happen. And that was evidenced very early on with the fight about the speakership. When was the last time you can remember a vote for the speakership of the U.S. House taking up to 15 ballots to decide? Lord knows I can't. To the best of my knowledge, that sort of thing hasn't happened since the days prior to the Civil War. But that's what happened. Why? Because McCarthy had a majority, but not a majority big enough to make sure he could avoid that problem. So you begin to see my point. McCarthy's problems didn't really start with the continuing resolution, although that was one of the last straws that broke the camel's back. He started his own problems long before he ever became Speaker. Now, let's talk about that vote on the CR for a moment. One of the biggest frustrations was the fact that leading up to the vote, McCarthy kept saying, we're going to hold the line on spending. We're going to force Joe Biden to do what we need to do, yada, yada, yada. And then at the very last, he changes his mind, puts through a clean CR, and the only thing that the Republicans got out of it was a non-Ukraine funding, which really didn't mean a whole lot because according to reports, which we mentioned in a video a day or so ago, that there was a deal being cut behind the scenes between McCarthy, the White House, Chuck Schumer in the Senate, and Hakeem Jeffries in the House, whereby McCarthy would bring up a single issue bill to vote on a new funding amount for Ukraine. Well, that was the last straw that broke the camel's back because the caucus made it very clear to McCarthy and to the Republicans in the Senate they wanted no part whatsoever of giving one more thin dime to the government of Ukraine to go on with this war that they've got going with Russia. So between the passage of the CR and the backdoor deal that McCarthy may have made with the Democrats, and remembering everything else that McCarthy had done in the 9 months that he was Speaker as far as promises not kept, that was enough for Gaetz to put the wheels in motion to this plan to vacate the chair. So, no, it wasn't just the vote on the CR or the Ukraine. These seeds were planted long before now. All that happened with the CR and the deal on Ukraine was it more or less put the last nails in McCarthy's political casket. And finally, where does it go from here? Well, that sort of depends on what the Republicans do next. Names are already being floated for people who could wind up replacing McCarthy. Now, one of the last things that McHenry did was put the House in recess for 1 week. I don't know that I would have done it for that long. It'd have been me. I'd have probably given it 2 or 3 days, let the House cool off, and then let everybody come back in. But he's Speaker pro tem. That's his choice. So, whose names are being floated? Take a look at this. This is from Reuters. Individuals who could succeed Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House? Steve Scalise, Republican of Louisiana, would be a sentimental favorite. The man's gone through a whole lot physically and personally over the years, between being shot at the normal bipartisan baseball game and the fact that he's currently battling cancer. Tom Emmer from Minnesota, who's the Republican whip. Jim Jordan of Ohio, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. Byron Donalds of Florida. Patrick McHenry. Even Donald Trump's name is being floated. But the one person who won't get it, well, two, won't be Hakeem Jeffries, and it won't be Kevin McCarthy. Why not McCarthy, you ask? Because McCarthy has said that when they come back from the recess, he's not going to run for Speaker again. Now, among that list of names that were mentioned, some comments. If it were me, and I were part of the U.S. House of Representatives on the Republican side, I don't know that I could vote for Emmers. He's too much like McCarthy in my book. Don't know that I could vote for McHenry. Same thing. Too much of a McCarthy ally. We need a clean break here. Scalise, I could probably vote for. Now, among the names on that list, the one that intrigues me the most is Byron Donalds of Florida. Very America first, very MAGA, and does not take any crap off of anybody. So where does it go from here? Well, we're going to find out shortly. But today, most certainly, has been a very, very interesting and most certainly historic day. But that's what I think about it. What do you think? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number one, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please do so. Number two, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear what you think about all this. Number three, please hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when new materials are coming out. Number four, share the video around. And finally, please give me a thumbs up. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you next time.